Last week on the podcast, I broke down Eric Swalwell's first move. The Instagram video, well, technically his problem began with Snapchat, but that's for another conversation. We talked about the careful admission, the errors of judgment line, paired with the flat denial of the worst allegations. And of course, we cannot forget that he mentioned his wife and that they were dealing with things privately. It's always with the wife. Well, you know what happened next. He suspended his campaign for governor. I mean, these things become so predictable. Then he announced he'd resign from Congress before they could vote to expel him. You understand. The point of last week's episode was to talk about that first move. The first move always tells you everything because with that move, you see the emotion behind it. And that's what predicts the outcome. And this week, two more men, they just happen to be men. This is not gender specific, but they just happen to be two guys who stood in front of microphones and made their first moves. Both of them just as revealing and also both just as predictable. So this week on the PR Breakdown, let's talk about two bad press conferences from the week and the one thing they both have in common. Hey there, welcome back to the podcast. I'm your host, Molly McPherson. All right, let's start with why am I laughing? Kash Patel makes me laugh. I have to be honest. When his name comes across a news feed, I always have to stop and I have to read because he's such a train wreck. He's really been on my radar since the Olympics, since the locker room ordeal. So it's no surprise that last week on April 17th, the Atlantic published a story called The FBI Director is MIA, which that's such a great title, FBI, MIA. The reporter, Sarah Fitzpatrick, talked to more than 24 sources, current FBI officials, former officials, intelligence community staff, hospitality workers, members of Congress. And the picture they painted was alarming. They described a director who drinks to the point of obvious intoxication, who has unexplained absences from the office, whose security detail on multiple occasions had difficulty waking him because he appeared intoxicated. They described a request for breaching equipment. That's the equipment used by SWAT teams because Patel had been unreachable behind locked doors. Then there was the incident on April 10th where Patel tried to log into a government computer system. He couldn't get in. Then, according to 9 sources, he panicked, started calling aides and allies, telling them he'd been fired. Can't you just picture this? If you picture the Kash Patel in the locker room after the hockey game when they won the gold medal, the men's team, you can picture what that would be like when he couldn't log into his computer. 2 sources in the article described it as a freak out. So I bet they were older. I bet if they were younger employees, they would call it a crash out. Of course, he hadn't been fired. It was a tech glitch or probably a Patel glitch, and it was resolved quickly. But here's why it matters. The man running the FBI, the agency responsible for counterterrorism, counterintelligence, and domestic security during an active military conflict with Iran, thought he'd been fired because his computer didn't work. And his first instinct wasn't to verify. It was to spiral, to crash out. So what was Patel's first move in response to this reporting? He sued the Atlantic for $250 million. That was the first public thing that we know that he did. Not a press conference, not a detailed rebuttal. As a crisis manager, I deal with this first reaction a lot. When people call me, many times it's because they have been publicly called out. And the first reaction for many people, they say they want to sue or they want to send a cease and desist. Whenever I hear that first reaction, I'm going to be honest here, I know that there is likely something they don't want to admit to that they want to cover. Not that it's necessarily anything illegal, but it's just a part of the story they don't want public. So they think if you sue or you go legal, it's going to be incredibly threatening, and then the other person is going to buckle and just fold. but it's also using legal as a way to keep information from being revealed. So then back to Patel, a few days ago, this was April 21st, he held a press conference at the department. And then on April 21st, he held a press conference at the DOJ. It was supposed to be about the SPLC indictment. And he brought acting Attorney General Todd Blanche, he replaced Pam Bondi, with him. And even Todd Blanche was a bit of a mess behind the podium at that press conference. When NBC's Ryan Riley asked about the lawsuit and the Atlantic's reporting, it went sideways fast. Take a listen.
Let's have a survey. How many of you people believe that's true? Hang on.
Did you communicate?
You asked the question. Let me answer it.
No, let me. No. Did you communicate with anyone that you thought you were fired after you were unable to log into?
The problem with you and your report, don't cut me off. You asked the question.
Straightforward question.
The problem with you and your baseless reporting is that is an absolute lie. It was never said. It never happened. And I will serve in this administration as long as the president and the attorney general want me to do so. And every time you guys report false lies, every time you guys raise baseless questions, when we are here to talk about the Southern Poverty Law Center's $3 million decade-long scheme to fraudulently fleece Americans, you are off topic.
Quote, let's have a survey, end quote. That's the FBI director's response to a reporter asking a legitimate question about something his own lawsuit acknowledges. Not an answer, not a clarification, mockery. And then acting AG Todd Blanche steps in and told the reporter, quote, stop, you're being extraordinarily rude. Just a little bit of respect, man. Just a tiny little bit. Try it sometime. And then acting AG Todd Blanche stepped in and told the reporter, which is such a page out of the Trump administration playbook. Hegseth just did the same thing a few weeks ago. So let me walk you through what just happened strategically. Patel brought backup. He brought the acting AG to stand next to him at the podium. And when a reporter pressed him, he needed that backup to shut the question down. That's not strength. That's a man who cannot stand alone in front of questions about his own conduct. Now, here's where the data tells the real story. I pulled the Muckrack media tracking numbers, and they are, well, stunning. Through early April, coverage of Kash Patel was running about 300 to 500 articles per day, normal range for a sitting FBI director. After the Atlantic piece dropped on April 17th, coverage jumped to about 615 articles. Significant, but manageable. After the lawsuit and the press conference, 3,563 articles in a single day mentioning both Kash Patel and the Atlantic. Overall, Patel's coverage hit 2,444 articles. So overall, as of April 22nd, when the numbers were run, it hit just over 2,400 articles. And here's the number that should keep his team up at night. Well, for many reasons why they're up at night. Kash Patel, the term, paired with the term press conference, went from 9 articles to 573 articles in a day. His response created a brand new media category about himself. His press conference did not kill the story. It fed the story. It gave it legs. It tripled it. And that is always what happens when a principal responds with anger instead of answers. The media cycle does not close. It restarts. And not only will reporters report on it, people will go to social media and they will post, like me.
What that means is I've taken half as many days off as those before me. What that means is I've taken a third less vacation than those before me. What that means is that this FBI, with this Department of Justice, has dropped the murder rate 20 points.
Inconceivable. You keep using the word. I don't think it means what you think it means.
So let's name what we're seeing. Your first move in a crisis reveals your intent, not your words, not your prepared statement, the one that comes before strategy kicks in. That's the one people remember, and that's the one that tells the truth. Patel's first emotional move was indignance, driven by fear. He didn't address the substance. He punished the source. He sued for $250 million. Then he stood at a podium and mocked a reporter for asking about it. Indignance is a specific emotion, and it communicates a specific thing. It says, how dare you question me? It does not say, here's the truth. It says, I will make you pay for asking. And the public reads that clearly. When someone's first instinct is to attack the people asking questions instead of answer them, you know who they're protecting. It's not the truth. It's themselves. If the allegations were false and Patel was genuinely confident in that, his first move would have looked completely different. It would be calm, direct, specific. Here's what actually happened on April 10th. Here's my schedule. Here's my record. That's what innocence sounds like. Indignance sounds like something else entirely. Here's another example. Different person, different crisis, same signal. In early April, the New York Post published photos of Patriots coach Mike Vrabel with Diana Russini, now a former reporter for The Athletic. They were at an adults-only exclusive resort in Sedona, Arizona. Their first move was identical, and it was coordinated, or loosely coordinated, because they made some mistakes there. In Vrabel's statement, these photos show a completely innocent interaction, and any suggestion otherwise is laughable. Laughable is the word he chose. Not private, not I understand the concern. Laughable, as in you're foolish for even asking. Russini's camp, Russini said they were there with a larger group of friends. Nothing to see here. I think one of the reports I read claimed that she said that she was on a girls' hiking trip. The problem, there are no photos of her hiking, nor are there any photos of her with girls. This morning, or last night actually. So last week, the New York Post published more photos from that resort. Not as great like when they first broke the story, but there are more photos. And this is them at breakfast, though when I was looking at the Post, it looked like it was only Diana Russini. But it just shows that someone was definitely watching them. It wasn't just casual observers. There have been reports out there that it was an investigator, perhaps on the Vrabel side, or now they're saying it was Russini's husband. I can't verify that at all, but it tracks because piece by piece, that story fell apart. Russini resigned from The Athletic. And The Athletic, who at first also indignant in their support for Diana Russini, which I thought was way off for our first reaction, which again, though, The Atlantic's reaction is tracking with everything that I'm talking about today. But eventually they have an investigation, and you just know that Russini couldn't produce any receipts to show that she wasn't just with Mike Vrabel. So she resigned. And also she was indignant in her response. So then last week, Mike Vrabel just blitzes a press conference. Nobody knows that he's going to get up and say something. So to call it held is very generous. But the Patriots sent out a media advisory the day before saying that 2 players would be available on Tuesday. They did not mention Vrabel. He showed up unannounced. Only beat reporters were in the room. No outsiders who might ask more pressing questions. It's people more, when you're a beat reporter, you're kind of a friend of the team in a way, even though reporters are there ethically reporting the story. Longtime beat reporters can be somewhat trusted. So it was a contained room. Listen to what he said.
You know, I've had some difficult conversations with people that I care about, with my family, the organization, the coaches, the players. Those have been positive and productive. You know, we believe in order to be successful on and off the field, you have to make good decisions. That includes me. That starts with me. We never want our actions to negatively affect the team. We never want to be the cause of a distraction. You know, and those are comments and questions that I've answered for the team and with the team. We'll keep those private and, you know, to ourselves. I care deeply about this football team, and I'm excited to coach them. I also know that I'm going to attack each day with humility and focus.
So that was roughly 2 minutes of talking. He said he'd had difficult conversations with people he cares about, his family, his coaching staff, his players. So what we have are just 2 minutes of difficult conversations, his family, his coaching staff, the players, you know, attacking each day with the humility and focus. And then he's done. He did not address the photos. He didn't explain the relationship. He did not say what changed. And that's where spin detection takes over. Because 2 weeks ago, Mike Vrabel, this was laughable. Now it requires difficult conversations with people I care about. That shift is enormous, and he never bridged it. He never said, here's why my tone changed, here's what I've learned, here's what's true, or my indestructible PR framework. Own it, explain it, promise it. 16 days since Mike Vrabel told all of us that it would be laughable that these two would hook up. Also, 15 minutes since I just logged off Substack Live talking about Mike Vrabel and Kash Patel's bad press conferences that tell you there's more to the story. The first move is always the tell. The contempt is the confession. Vrabel's laughable comment told us all that it was true. And now the New York Post has definitely doubled down to say that it was true. The Patriots went from trying to kill the story, Vrabel saying the story was laughable, to the press conference that he was not promoted to be at, just two players, and it was only the beat reporters for the Patriots. And then the next day, he's going to counseling. And now this. This is what happens when you cover. The Defector headline said it perfectly. Mike Vrabel says a whole lot of nothing. And the staging made it worse. If you're being humble and transparent, you don't sneak into a press conference. You walk into the room. You stand there and you take every question. That's what humility actually looks like. What Mike Vrabel did looked like damage control with a 2-minute time limit. His statement was there to protect himself, not the organization, where he represents the team as the coach. This is what happens when you try to dodge the truth. This would not be a 2-week plus story if Mike Vrabel just did the right thing. And now, at the time of this recording on April 23rd, the headline, Mike won't be with the Patriots for NFL Draft Day 3. And here's the statement. As I said the other day, I promised my family, this organization, this team, that I was going to give them the best version of me that I can possibly give them. In order to do so, I've committed to seeking counseling starting this weekend. This is something that I have given a lot of thought to and is something I would advise a player to do if I was counseling them. So he said this the day after his press conference. That is the signal, the evidence to show that it didn't work. Continuing, quote, I've always wanted to lead by example, and I believe this is what I have to do to be the best husband, father, and coach that I can possibly be. This is not an easy thing for me to admit, but it is one that I know will make me a better person. I appreciate the support that everyone has given me and promise a stronger resolve as well. Own it, explain it, promise it. But it needs to be the first move, not your last. And here's a little side note that should worry Mike Vrabel, which is why he likely eventually got to this point. Hotels have surveillance cameras, a lot of them. And Pro Football Talk pointed out that a disgruntled or enterprising employee could burn footage onto a thumb drive and sell it to the Post or TMZ. That's exactly what happened in a Ray Rice case in 2014. And here's the part that should worry him most, including the Patriot organization. There were photos. They don't know where those photos came from. But also, hotels have surveillance cameras. They could go back and look at cameras. And if you have someone wanting to make a quick buck at a hotel, they may have already done that. So Mike Vrabel went from contempt with laughable. And the problem with contempt as a crisis strategy is that it dares the public or your stakeholders to prove you wrong. And you want to know what? The public always accepts that dare. 3 emotions. Patel chose indignance. He sued, he shouted, he mocked, and coverage tripled. Indignance. He says, I will destroy anyone who questions me. Vrabel and Rossini chose contempt. Laughable. 2 weeks later, difficult conversations. Contempt says, how dare you ask? And when contempt softens into something that looks like guilt, everyone notices the shift. Swalwell chose calculated vulnerability. Admit the small stuff, like, I may have stepped out on my wife, but you deny the big stuff, even though the two could clearly be linked together. And he looked into a camera, posted on Instagram to say all that. And each day that followed brought something worse. Calculated vulnerability says, I know exactly how bad this is, and I am trying to outrun it. Each of these first moves, emotional, not strategic. And in each case, the emotion told the truth that the words were trying to hide. So here's the real question. Think about this in your own life for a second. The last time someone close to you got caught in something, they refused to take accountability for something. What was their first reaction? It was probably a mixture of contempt, anger, and being indignant. But what you didn't get was an explanation, not accountability, just anger. And when that happened, did you believe them? Or did the anger tell you everything you needed to know? Now think about someone who responded with contempt when you brought something up and they said, that's ridiculous. That's laughable. How could you think that? Did that make you trust them more? Or did it tell you they weren't just denying it, they were insulting you for asking? They were insulted. Your first emotional move is the one people remember, not your prepared statement, not your lawyer's letter, not the feeling behind it. That's what stays. The hardest press conference you'll ever give isn't in front of cameras. It's in your kitchen or in your boss's office or in a text message you've been putting off for 3 days. And the rule is the same. When your first words are built to protect yourself instead of address what happened, the person on the other side fills in the blanks, and they never fill them in your favor. But if you're on the receiving end of it, look for the indignance, look for the contempt and the anger, and know that that first move is telling you everything you need to know for you to make your next move. Just when you think, oh, I know. Oh, Mike Vrabel, I should have known this story was going to continue. I'm adding this on a day later because more drops in the story. Because, of course, Page 6 just dropped new photos. Not from Arizona, not from last month, from 2020, 6 years ago. Mike Vrabel and Diana Rossini in a bar in Tribeca, the Tribeca Tavern. It's dimly lit, kind of hole in the wall, nobody's around. And according to the, quote, eyewitness, whoever this is, they were kissing. And they were all over each other, and he had his wedding ring on. So this was March 2020, which nowhere in any of the coverage is anyone saying pandemic. Like, what were the two of them doing out? Maybe it was early March. But Vrabel then was the head coach of the Tennessee Titans. Rossini was covering the NFL for ESPN at that time, extensively covering his team. He was married to Jen, and she just got married to her husband 6 months later. 6 years before the Arizona photos, 6 years before, quote, laughable, end quote, and 6 years before the difficult conversations that Vrabel's talking about over and over again. And 6 years, of course, before the counseling that is supposed to take place this weekend. And here's the part that ties this whole episode together. Page 6 contacted both Vrabel and Rossini on Wednesday afternoon for comment on these photos. Neither responded. But hours later, Vrabel released that prepared statement about seeking counseling and missing 3 days of the NFL draft. Then, last night, I'm making dinner, happened to be on Instagram, pop, comes Instagram Live. Mike Vrabel is talking again, and I'm watching him now, and I know, at first I thought, oh my gosh, is he resigning? And then I could tell right away, again, with the difficult conversations, I talked to the guys, like, he's not resigning. Not that I necessarily want him to, because I don't know if I say this enough. I'm a Mike Vrabel fan. We're a Patriots household. This is killing us. And honestly, I just turned down so much media outreach. My gosh, Boston media, but also New York. And there was this one station who just wrote me back twice because first I said, no, I'm not going to do an interview on your morning show. And then they wrote back again and said, well, can you talk next week? And I ended up deleting it because I thought, I don't want them razzing me. But it's like, no, I'm a Boston fan. I'm not going on a New York station trashing Vrabel. The Red Sox just lost the series to the Yankees. Like, no, I'm sorry, but I didn't say that. I deleted that. But the truth was I was never going to talk to a New York station, even though I know they weren't asking me to dump on Vrabel, but that's what it was going to be. But I turned down a lot of Boston media as well because I just don't have time. And I'm really coming to the conclusion because I just don't have time. I obviously respect reporters and what they have to do, but I just don't have the time. But watching Vrabel again with the press conference. It's killing me. So I did one more quick deep dive because I wanted to find out the piece about crisis management, because that's been a part of the story as well. Who did they bring in? Like, who did they hire? And what I found was from a story, it's now being somewhat widely covered right now, that in the original Page 6 story, it said that there was a, quote, notorious crisis strategist, and, quote, supposedly handling all this effort. The Patriots VP of Communications denied it, saying neither Robert Kraft nor the New England Patriots have hired any external crisis communications expert. But here's the thing. He repeatedly denied the crisis strategist part. He never directly answered whether pressure was applied to the post. And ESPN reported that Rossini herself promptly retained a crisis communications expert after Page 6 first contacted her. So the Patriots didn't use a crisis expert. Maybe they should have. And they all want fixers, but I am the type of crisis expert for this very type of crisis. If you listen to this podcast or follow me, I have a very different type of crisis management. I do not get you out of the mess. I get you through the mess. What Vrabel did, what Rossini did through all of it, that is trying to get around it, and then you get pulled into it, and then you get stuck into it. So again, to wrap, let's update the pattern. The first move tells you the intent. Contempt is the confession. Laughable, that word, told us we would be here 2 weeks later. So you know what I said earlier in the episode? The first move is always the tell. It's the one thing people say before lawyers get involved and everything else. And contempt is the confession that hasn't been caught yet. That's all for this week's podcast. Thanks so much for listening. Bye for now.